So, this is a very special episode. We are officially 1 year into the Fearless Warrior podcast, and I thought it would be really fun. I have here in my office live with me my own mother. The cool conversation that we're going to have today, I just wanted to interview my mom and ask her advice and her perspective as my mom and coaching two daughters that played sports and our little brother that played sports and just have a really cool, authentic behind the scenes conversation. Mom, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. This is fun.
So I have some notes on my phone. We had kind of talked about what the heck would I ask my own mom? And so let's just kick it off. Tell us a little bit about you. You're newly retired. At the time of this recording, you are retired from teaching, so you don't have to go back to school. Happy August.
Thank you. And with school starting, I'm wondering how it's going to go when everybody else is going back to school and I don't.
Yeah.
Am I going to meander? Or am I going to get things done?
You can come on more podcasts and help with all my stuff.
Okay.
So you've raised competitive children. You've raised lots of different personalities and my siblings and the relationship that I have with my siblings. But I want to hear from your perspective. We have a lot of parents that listen to this, a lot of coaches. At what point did you kind of realize, oh, I think softball is something that we are really going to take seriously? Like, when did that happen for you guys?
I just think after your initial little team, the Pink Pigs, that you showed a lot of passion for it at an early age. And then when you asked to pitch and said, I would like to try it, it was like, oh, she's hooking into this. And then by the time you were in high school, you and JC were just an awesome team, catching and pitching with one another.
Yeah. And so talk about some of those times growing up, because I vividly remember there were days that you would kick us out of the house in the summer, like go outside, go practice with your sister, go get your reps in. What was that like?
Oh, just your dad and I, especially your dad, was always concerned about you living in the country. Get outside and enjoy the beautiful space that you live in. And so it was more his idea in that respect. But you guys enjoyed your time. He just made a magical place for you to go from little station to station, whether it was a tire swing or hanging out at the tube or practicing your pitching against the tire that he set up for you. There were lots of good memories.
I remember one time you were trying to motivate JC and I, and it was really funny because you said, what did you say? You were trying to make it fun for us, and you were throwing us pot flies, and you said, oh, if you don't catch this, then there's going to be lava, or oh, if you don't catch this fly ball. I just remember the summertime was your time to like make things fun for us.
Yeah. And if you don't catch it, yep. Oh, it's really important that you catch this ball, because if you drop it, we're all going to die.
Yeah.
Yeah. Silly things.
So you talked a little bit about the Pink Pigs. You talked about pitching. Give us a behind the scenes. Like, what's a funny story that stands out to you from our playing days?
I just initially, when all the little girls decided on the Pink Pigs, I thought that is so counterintuitive to what our culture teaches us. But I thought it was so endearing that you were that innocent as a group of little girls with your braided hair and your little tiny gloves, that you were going to be the Pink Pigs.
But next year, the year after that, we were the Red Devils.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
things
then
changed quickly.
But then we started select ball. So we played 2 years of YMCA. So after we played 2 years of YMCA, which in our area is rec ball, then at what point did you realize, oh, this whole world of select softball?
They were starting the heat program in Waverly. So that kind of developed into the select ball. That was kind of new for the town, and they were trying to really build that team at different age levels. And so you guys started with the heat program.
Okay, so here's a really good story that stands out to me. So we're going to kind of jump around on the timeline. But one of the things that you guys always did was we always went out to eat and made things magical, regardless of our performance. And the example that I can think of is this is in college. I remember my freshman year of college being really difficult. I was on my own, and JC was at a different college playing softball. And this particular game, I remember I did like horrible. and I got to go to Outback Steakhouse with you and dad. And it was like one of those realizations of this whole time, I never doubted how much you guys loved me. And you guys never put a pressure on us to perform. Was that intentional?
Well, the whole purpose of being in an organized league like that was to have fun and to teach you skills. So you had different opportunities, even FFA, those things taught you skills, and softball taught you skills that were lifelong. Just being a part of a team, being successful, having fun. That was our whole purpose of doing that. We tried building in the family activities so that it wasn't strictly softball.
But if it was all fun for us, at what point did you realize, like, did we create that competitiveness? How did you foster, what's the right word? How did you foster dedication? How did you foster motivation? How did you foster confidence within us?
That was really organic. When you showed the interest in the sport, we could just guide you from the sidelines. If you're going to do this, you have to make sure that you love it and that you have fun. And so it wasn't necessarily the competitiveness that was important.
I think this next generation of parents is really struggling with that. So I hear that a lot of, I want her to be better. We're getting her hitting lessons, we're getting her pitching lessons. You guys did all those things too, but I never felt the pressure. And so I guess what I'm hearing you say is you didn't have that pressure. You didn't put that pressure on us. You just really kept the emphasis on fun, which is kind of counterintuitive. A lot of parents don't believe that that works.
Yeah, it was about fun. And if you weren't having fun, then we weren't going to do that. You had to show us that you were interested and you remained interested in the sport and you had a good time with your team.
So was there ever a time that I came to you and was so frustrated that I wanted to quit? Or like, do you remember any low points?
I don't ever remember you wanting to quit.
I don't either. I just wondered from your perspective if there was ever a time that you had to correct us or kind of guide us.
No, it was organic. You always showed that interest and that passion for the game. And we would ask you, is this something that you want to continue? You have to make the commitment too.
Yeah.
It may have been something as simple as, have your bag ready and packed, because if you forget your cleats or your helmet or batting gloves, you won't be playing. So we placed a lot of those decisions on you and you continued. So I don't remember you feeling like you didn't want to continue.
And that makes sense because thinking back from your perspective, again, like if you're listening to this, parents, it sounds so counterintuitive, but when you make it fun and you put it back on your athlete, they really do find their passion and their joy because they don't doubt, oh, I'm just doing this for mom and dad.
It was never about what we wanted, and we always gave you that option. And so because you continued that, and I think one of the moments that I thought, wow, they're willing to go and umpire, then they really have an interest in the game. So when the two of you would drive off in your little uniforms, it was like, if they're willing to get yelled at by people in the stands, then they like this game.
Dad didn't want me to do that. I asked him for a job. I begged him for a job. I wanted to have a summer job. And so I don't know if we were 14 or 15 or 16. I can't remember when we started umpiring, but dad was against it. He's like, you don't need a job. Be a kid. Enjoy your summer.
I think every parent says that. I remember my parents saying, why would you want to start working at 14? You have your whole life ahead of you and you don't need to start working this early. And so I think that's a general concern for every parent.
We did love it. We made a lot of memories. We were the youngest umpires.
Yeah, it was crazy. And I was proud of you.
I think it made us better softball players too, to be honest. So this isn't on my list of questions, but this brings up something that I think would be really fun for people to hear because I think they see Coach AB, the girls that I coach see Coach AB, and I'm not perfect. And so, do you remember I can't remember what game or how old I was, but do you remember the first time I threw my helmet in the dugout where I like threw a bat? Do you remember that?
No, the only time that I remember getting really frustrated with you is when you came home and you scored and the coach had his hand out and you were mad at him about a directive and you would not shake his hand or you wouldn't high five him. And I was livid. I thought, yeah, you can't be rude.
Yeah,
You just can't.
I remember that one. There were definitely moments that I was more I let my emotions get the best of me. And so I think, and this will kind of segue the conversation that I wanted to have with you today, but I really struggled with my anger. Like I was so passionate about the game and so emotional, even in college, even in the final days of my career. If I got pulled on the mound, that's what that situation was. I had gotten pulled from pitching, and then for some reason, like I still got to bat. I think we were batting the whole order. It was still pool play. And so I was so mad that I got pulled and I cried and I was emotional. That was something that like you really had to coach me through of like how to manage your emotions, how to deal with the anger, how to manage being a good teammate. Like that. Can you talk about that? How did you coach me through some of those moments?
We just, when you were on the field, we didn't want you to throw a fit. You couldn't throw your bat. We didn't want you throwing your helmet. Once you're into the dugout and you're emotional, that's another story. That's where teammates kind of pump one another up. And that's when you can show your exasperation. I just didn't want you to do it in the middle of a play or a game. So yeah, everybody has those emotions and I get frustrated when I do something wrong. And of course, these days I have your dad talking to me in my head and there are some things that I go, "Oh, but I can laugh about that word."
Yeah.
Um not necessarily that it's appropriate.
Well, so let's kind of talk about that. Those of you guys that don't know my story, my dad has since passed and was very passionate. I would say that I'm very much similar to dad's personality in that he would be sitting in the stands and I wanted him to correct me. I wanted him to shout out. And I can hear him in the stands, "Come on, AB." He would tell me, "Glove up, AB, glove up, AB." And we laugh now, but at the time, dad would have very harsh words for me after games sometimes. And your parenting was completely opposite. And at the time, I would get so frustrated. I would get frustrated with dad, but then here you would come in, the yin and the yang, and you would come in and you would always say, "Have fun, smile." And there would be times that you would yell out when I'm pitching. You could tell on my face, she just needs to smile. She just needs to get back to the fun and the joy. And you would say, "Smile, AB." And at the time, I don't think I appreciated that as much.
There were times that I thought your dad was too harsh when we got into the car. And there were a couple of moments where we struggled with one another when he was being too hard. And I just said, you can't do that. The teacher in me, you don't back kids into the corner. You just have to work with those emotions and they're going to have off times and you can't expect them to be perfect. And so sometimes when his frustration was evident, I would have to pull him back and say, think about what you're saying right now.
But I think that's what made you guys a good team because I knew who to go to when I needed something. Like I remember, this is going to make me cry, but you don't even know about this. I don't think I've ever told you about this, but there's a picture of us in South Sioux City. Do you know what I'm talking about? There's a picture where we have blankets over our heads in college. It was a really, really cold tournament. I wasn't used to pitching in the cold. I like freshman year was just really difficult for me. And I remember coming up to you after I'm sure I had given up home runs. My ERA was atrocious. And I just remember coming up to you and you like opened up your blanket and you like gave me a big hug and I like you didn't have to say anything. That's what I needed in that moment.
Hmm.
Do you remember that?
I kind of remember that, but I'm more of the nurturing type of person. Your dad was the get things done type of person, type A personality. Um, when you were in college that first year, it bothered me so much because I thought you would handle that without any problems. And you would cry every Sunday night when you'd go back to college. And it was like, this is not my type A Amanda. And then JC just laughed at me when I was crying and sending her off to college for the first time. And so I had to adjust myself to that because the daughter who I thought would struggle, you guys juxtaposed. And you've done that at different times in your life and your relationship with your sister
Yeah.
because you're so close in age. So,
Yeah. So let's talk about that. What advice would you give to parents? We talk a lot on the podcast and I talk a lot with those that I coach. 80% of the coaching that I do is how do I give my daughter more confidence? How do I boost her confidence? How do I get her to trust her training? And I really do feel like a lot of my confidence was nurtured even before I stepped foot on the softball field. And so I would almost swing more to the other 20%, which at times I was very cocky. I was overconfident. How did you raise me compared to my siblings? And like what was your perspective on that?
I think the lesson that I learned through teaching and that I wanted for my kids is I wanted you to be assertive without being obnoxious. And so I had to decide what hill to fight, what battle that I wanted to engage in. And with most kids, I just never wanted to back anyone into a corner, and I waited until it was really important. So if there were times that I thought you were being obnoxious, those were times that I had the conversation with you, but other times you were assertive, and that was important for you to stand your ground, and that made you strong in your sport because you did have the confidence. I mean, when I'd be standing at the concession stand and parents would come up and say, you got to check this pitcher out that's pitching for the Rockets. We're playing them next. You really need to go watch this girl. And I'm like, that's really cool. But I didn't say that to you. I mean, there were times that I was really proud of you when you go strike one, strike two, strike three, bam. And then you do that over and over and over. I think that brought your confidence. And I don't know that we told you that other parents were talking. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember that there were situations where like the praise would come, but I wasn't doing it for the praise. I just genuinely was a super competitive person. And I think about that today because like board games, like the Blockus and the Mensa games and like the strategy games, do not make me play Sorry or Uno. Like those games aren't games of skill. Like give me a strategy game. And so for me, like what I'm saying is you guys fostered that and not just in softball, like you fostered that with grades, you fostered that with board games, you fostered that. And we played other sports. And do you remember when I signed up for track and you found out
Yeah.
I was doing hurdles?
Yeah.
I
After
just,
breaking your leg.
yeah, I just wanted to compete,
Yeah.
even if I knew nothing about it.
And that when you talk about nature versus nurture, that was natural for you to be that competitive. Sometimes I joke and said, you spent too much time working on dad's truck with him. You know, you spent a lot of time in the shed talking to him. But I think you were born with that personality, that competitiveness.
Yeah. So, okay, as a teacher and somebody who loves psychology, and just so you guys all know, my mom has easily read way more books and studied psychology way longer than I have. How much of confidence do you feel like is nature versus nurture? Like, how do you teach it?
I think that's more of a guide, you know, having those conversations. Um, you like those challenges from the very first moment. So that wasn't something we could really instill, but we could get you games, or we could get you lessons, or we could give you the tools that you wanted to accelerate in that passion.
The example that I think of is like gourd birdhouses. Like one year for an FFA project, all winter I had like started like 30 to 40 gourd seeds. And I just remember dad looking at me like, what are you doing? But then he was the first one to like, okay, you committed to this. I literally grew a whole garden full of gourds. And then it was like, okay, like you have to follow through with this.
And it's that follow through. Yeah, kind of like when you came to me and said, I'm making a t-shirt quilt. And it's like, oh, that's not just a small t-shirt quilt. It's like king size.
But I didn't know how to sew really. I mean, I knew a little
No,
bit.
no, just show me how to put these blocks together. And you had the tenacity to sit there all day and you put that whole quilt together. And it was like something I couldn't do. I was proud of you.
Yeah. But I think the nature versus nurture is like, okay, if you do have a kid that maybe gets on your nerves. I mean, I know this now as a parent. I had to have pushed buttons as a kid, as a teen.
You didn't push buttons in negative ways. I mean, there were very few instances where I had to say, knock it off. And we would have that come to Jesus meeting, and you listened to that. You were mature enough to figure that out. A lot of it's maturation, and we had to let you go and experiment. If you had that desire, we were going to support you any way we could. We couldn't do it for you, but as long as you showed that interest, we would channel that for you and give you tools.
Yeah, for sure. So this is the Kansas City conversation. When I took you to Kansas City. Do you remember that?
Mhm.
Okay. So I wanted to talk about this for sure because this is one of the pivotal moments where it was kind of one of the seedlings of why Fearless Fastpitch exists today. And I was coaching travel ball. And I remember asking you if you wanted to come to Kansas City with me. So you and I did a girls' trip. I was coaching the Twisters. And I think at the time they were 14U. And I'm out there coaching. And we got back to the hotel room that later that night. And I remember the conversation that you had with me. You kind of asked me the question of, hey, I don't notice a whole lot of dominant pitching back when you used to play. And what you meant by that was you were just so confident on the mound, and it was a pitcher's duel, the physicality, the mentality. And we had a really cool conversation around that. Do you remember that?
I do, because I hadn't been to a softball game for a long time. And just being able to go back into that arena, it was really fun for me to rediscover that. But yeah, I didn't always see the passion with the girls on the mound that I saw with you.
Yeah. And so you put that question kind of back on me. This was before I even knew what mental performance was.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of asked me a question. I can't remember how you asked it, but it was something to the extent of, what made you so confident? And if you could teach this, because I was coaching at the time
Mm-hmm.
and you were trying to make me a better coach. And you said, how do you teach that? How do you bottle if you could bottle this up and teach other girls how to have that dominance? Could you do it? You kind of put that back on me.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's the self-esteem part that just because the kids, sometimes I think the kids are participating in too much. And I know that want their kids in multiple sports, but to me, sometimes it's too much. I worry the kids can't really focus in on one sport. They're going all the time and they're exhausted. And so when people say, oh, you'll never be a professional athlete if you're not multi sports, I don't know if that's accurate, because then I think kids get burnt out.
Well, even think about the difference in seasons. So back when we played, remember the snowball tournament was in the end of April,
Mm-hmm.
and then we ended before county fair. So it was, right about this time, we knew that by the time birthdays and county fair roll around, season is over.
Mm-hmm.
And now, like PGF, I have girls going out to PGF is into August 2nd. And then you think about some of these warmer weather states, they start playing in January. And even in Nebraska, we've started playing in February and March.
Yeah.
It's like you just extended the season by double. Instead of a 3-month season, now it's a 6-month season. When do they get a break?
Yeah. How do you play four sports when you're focused on that much time commitment?
Yeah. Multiple sports, longer seasons.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And going to school on top of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you see that as a teacher.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, so this has been really fun. And you guys have gotten to hear a little bit behind the scenes of a huge part of why Fearless Fast Pitch exists today and a huge part of who I am today. And so thank you for letting me share you, Mom, with our listeners. And I hope you guys got a little bit of insight on more about my personal life. Um, the favorite question and the question we ask all of our podcast guests, and I didn't tell you about this question, but it's the time traveler question. If you could travel back in time and tell your past self any message, what would you tell yourself?
Even today, I have to talk to myself about patience. And I'm sure that all of my kids are sick of hearing me say patience is a virtue, but I didn't always have patience. And I have to pull myself back and look at in the moment what's really important. So today, I drop everything to play with my grandkids. So that patience of wanting to get things done and get my chores done and have all my eggs in a basket doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's important now? I love that. Time. Thanks
Time.
for time today. Let me interview you. This has been special.
Thanks. I loved it.
I love you, Mom.
I love you.
That's a wrap.
That's a